donors are a key partner in that work, as you all are aware of. What we know right now is that the budgets of nonprofit organizations have been catastrophically hit. 52% of nonprofit organizations have canceled events, resulting in the loss of $11.8 million in revenue, and an additional $4 million was spent by the organization to invest in the tech to be able to convert what they do into this new way of working. And that $4 million wasn't anything of what was budgeted. Being able to connect with donors and share our story as nonprofits so that we can outline our needs is so important on a regular day. But right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, making these conversations harder and ever more critical. So this brings us to the right now with us having this conversation. And right now I'd like to turn the time over to Alex so she can make proper introductions and we can get going with our webinar today. But thank you so much, and I'm grateful to be here to engage with all of you today.
Thank you, Kate. Well, the first one I'm going to introduce is Cathy LeMay. Cathy has committed her life to global social change. She's traveled the world listening to, learning from, and raising money for those who've survived war, genocide, gender-based violence, and climate-induced disasters. In the course of her work, Cathy has raised $175 million, led international women's human rights organizations, become a sought-after public speaker, a published author, and served as philanthropic advisor to some of the world's most renowned philanthropists. Jackie Zehner. Jackie dedicates her time and resources towards the advancement of women and girls. As the president of the Jacquelyn and Gregory Zehner Foundation, a role she's held for the past 20 years, Jackie funds and champions a wide variety of projects and organizations with a particular focus on women's rights, women's entrepreneurship, philanthropic movement building, and social issue media. Jackie's co-founder and founding president of Women Moving Millions, which is a community of over 330 members who have collectively given over $1 billion to organizations and programs that focus on women. Prior to her philanthropic focus, Jackie was a partner and managing director at Goldman Sachs, where she was the youngest woman and first female trader to make partner. So pretty cool. Exciting to have Cathy and Jackie today, and I will hand it over to you too.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. Just one comment up front, because I'm a donut with a capital D. I sent the wrong link to some of you. So if you see yourself up top as me, Jacquelyn Zehner, and especially if you're unmuted, please mute if you don't mind, because you're all sort of up there as a speaker. Oh, thank you. And if you want to go do a participant link, you can find it in the chat room, which is on your right. And as we begin, just encourage you to share who you are again in the chat room. And if you do have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button below to post your questions there. We just don't want to make sure they don't get lost in the chat, but really want to make this super interactive. Post, in comments what's showing up for you as I'm asking Cathy questions and she's responding. We can pull from that to do a summary of the call. And of course, this is being recorded as well. So thank you so much for joining today. And Alex, thank you for being willing to host this. I really approached Alex just to say, to offer up this conversation with Cathy. Cathy and I have been friends for 2 decades. She's been my philanthropic advisor. We've worked together fundraising for many organizations. She actually stepped in a time of need for me with Women Moving Millions to become our interim executive director for a period of time, and did a major great job there. And actually just recently, which I'm sure she'll share a little bit about, is now a full-time philanthropy. What's your title, Cathy, with your new organization?
Director of Philanthropy.
Director of Philanthropy at another organization as well. So Cathy has worn an incredible number of hats. Over the years, I've interviewed Cathy. We've been on stage together talking about philanthropy and fundraising and how to create really healthy donor, grantee, partner relationships, you name it. And she is my go-to person when really about anything in terms of philanthropy and fundraising. And, that's why when I approached Alex to have this conversation with Cathy, it really was with the intention of bringing her expertise to all of you here in Utah. Cathy has actually led fundraising workshops with me in the past here in Park City. And again, this session is for you. It's not for us. So please be sure to post questions and comments, and we really want to hear from you. But that said, welcome. And I'd like to kick it off, Cathy. I'm going to ask you some questions, then I'm going to lean in and make sure I check out the Q&A section that, we're responding to what people's needs are. But I'd just love to start it off, and I didn't tell you this in the list of questions I sent you. But why don't you just share a little bit now about sort of you in this moment? I mean, you have an incredible history in fundraising and in philanthropy and social change work. And we are an incredible, I hate to use the word unprecedented, because it's so overused. That being said, it's also very true. But, just tell us a little bit more about you in this moment and a little bit about your philosophy on fundraising as we start off this call.
Sure. So I'm really glad to be here with you all, the great state of Utah. I love your state so much, and I was just there in February, and I think we on the East Coast don't realize what a great kept secret you are. It's stunningly beautiful there. The people are so friendly, and really getting a sense of how profound the commitment to community social changes in your state. So really, really glad to be with you. Yeah, how about now, right? So I've been getting called a lot lately from different publications saying, what percentage of nonprofits do you think will make it or won't make it? I'm like, oh, that's a nice, easy question to answer. And because I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, and I think how I'm seeing and how I'm looking at it, and part of what I want to share today is, I think we're being called on to transform in our sector pretty profoundly. I think we will no longer be kind of doing business as usual. I think you're going to see that our sector has solutions and answers for the problems that we're all facing, that we need to be proud of the fact that we've been incubating and creating community solutions that can help the whole country. And there's a real opportunity to approach donors with, I believe we have a solution here that we can not only get through this together, but possibly on the other side be stronger than when we started. And it requires a partnership with you in a really profound way to make that happen. So I have to say, I vacillate across the board. I can go from some days going, everything's going to be okay. And then some days I go, oh, it's all so grim, I don't know what to do. So I flip in and out of where I'm at. But what I really think right now, Jack, is if there's ever been a sector that's needed to lead in the history of the world, it's our sector, and now. I have seen remarkable things happen in these past 3 months, and people do extraordinary actions and services with very little resources. The key is that's not sustainable. And so today's about how do you get the resources for the very important ambition you have in front of you. And I think it's about much less a solicitation in this environment and a lot more an invitation.
Cathy, thank you for that opening. And I agree. I mean, I go through, I'm sure we all do, periods of like realizing it's a moment, as you said, to transform, but with moments of wanting to hide under the covers a lot, especially if you're, on the front lines, like so many of the people on the call are. And speaking of the front lines, I know one question, Cathy, you get a lot right now is, what if, or if my organization is not on the front lines of the pandemic, being in a direct service organization. I serve on the board of the Christian Center here in Park City, for example, which is one that is on the front lines of this. But how do you approach donors? How do you think about sort of your place and the process of engagement when you're not the one that's, medical service or food service or mental health counseling necessarily, like really frontline kind of work?
Yeah. So I think in the first few weeks and even the first 2 months, it might have been a misstep if you were not frontline to do an outreach and say, well, we have this media platform and we've lost members, so you need to hurry and make a rescue gift. I think that would have landed not very well. And it was quite similar to fundraising after 9/11 in New York. It was when was the right time to begin to invite New York donors to contribute to the organizations they'd been giving to before that were out of Greater Manhattan. And part of that is deep listening. Are you really listening to where your donors are at and what they're feeling, what they're hopeful about, what they're afraid of? And I think sometimes in development, we get in a vacuum and go, this has happened to my budget. These are all the people we're not going to serve. oh no, come fall or winter, it will be this. And then we blast something in an email and say, hurry and fix it, not knowing, is that something people are actually ready to hear? So I think in the beginning months, I saw some people do ask that maybe it wasn't that it wasn't the right ask, but it was delivered at the wrong time. And the key seems to be the right invitation at the right time. And I think now what I'm really seeing from donors is a shift from, okay, this is going to be a much longer pandemic than maybe any of us understood. And so what does it look like to do long-term thinking and also meet short-term needs? And I think many of us in nonprofits are thinking that way, and I'm starting to see donors thinking in a parallel track. So what I ask people to do, here's the advice I have for you on this. If you are thinking of sending an email where our doors are going to close and we're not going to make budget unless you fund us, maybe step back from that a little bit and say, what's the future of our organization? What would funding do for us and allow us to do? There's a donor said to me recently, I don't know how many sinking ships I can give to. And what that made me realize is that's a lot of the messages that are going out, which seems to, like, on its front face, that why wouldn't someone want to save our organization? But there's only so many organizations a donor feels they can save. What they're looking for is, what's the long-term view? And if it's messy and difficult, it's all right. But could you just walk me through it and say, what's the bridge from here to the other side? And are you asking me to walk that bridge with you? So I think it is okay to start opening conversations and asking for support for your mission if you're not frontline COVID. But I really invite you to think about, what's the future our organization wants to create, and what's now the invitation to a donor to be part of that future. It's the weighted, I don't know how you all feel, but sometimes like the weight of feeling on my lungs and my chest with this whole thing. When someone pulls me out of that in an appeal and says, we imagine this future 2 years from now where we're doing this differently, and we really need you to walk that path with us, that is so different for me, who gives at the level I give at, which is different than a lot of other people. But it's a really different invitation than, oh my God, Kath, hurry, or everything is lost. You will often get a one-time reaction gift, but you won't get a long-term responsive relationship.
Yeah, and I think I read that piece that you on Inside Philanthropy, which if people don't subscribe, it's a great platform about sort of the sinking ship. And I think it's challenging because the reality is I'm an active investor as well as a donor, and I'm on a lot of calls right now with startup companies or around, venture funds that have investments in companies, and, a lot are going to go under. It's just the reality of an economic contraction. It's the reality of, what organizations, nonprofit or for-profit, have in terms of cash on hand. It's, some business models just won't work, period. In a new environment in which, this could be protracted, which we don't know. And so when you think about donor engagement, because I think we could talk a lot about important topics around management and well-being of organizations, financial sustainability, what can be done from a budget perspective, et cetera. The focus here, I think, on this call is really thinking about how do we engage with donors, whether it be our board, our long-term donors, our higher level, perhaps donors, to people who, write a small check every year, to people who buy tickets. So when you think about sort of relationships across the spectrum of who gives to an organization, how do you think about, if you were in the role, which you are, obviously, with the organization you're in, some counsel or advice on this donor engagement, on how to communicate, how often, what, to your point, some of the messages that we should be all mindful of in those communications?
Yeah. So how often and when? I actually just had a full strategy meeting about this with my team, which was, if I were to call all these top 10 donors right now and say to them out of the blue, hey, do you know what we're up to and what we're doing and how we are? and where we've had successes, but also where we're hurdling. And I'm new to this organization. And I said, how do you think they'd respond? And the general sense normally is, I think they know, but I'm not sure. Or these two donors know because I had a call with them, but I'm not sure. I have never in the almost 30 years of doing this, have ever heard a donor say, you know what, that group communicates with me way too much about impact. My God, yet another email about what's happening. Most people, donors don't do what you do for a living. So they're not paying attention to your work to the depths to which you're paying attention to your work. We tend to assume people have knowledge about our mission and our work and our hurdles, and we are mostly incorrect. And if you're thinking about, wait, could that really be true? Think right now of two nonprofits. I'm sure you all write checks. So think of two nonprofits that you've written to recently. Do you feel fully informed about what they're doing? Groups you've given money to. Do you feel completely up to speed about this is where they're at, this is where they're having achievements, this is where their hurdles are, this is where they need me? For the most part, the answer to that question is no. There are exceptions, but for the most part, it's no. So I really advise you to sit down and say, how do we inform and educate our donors in the best way possible right now, in a way that almost feels like we're messaging them too much? Because historically, we actually message people about impact and results way too little. And create a calendar. By June 30th, what do you want your donor base to know about your organization and where it's at right now? And then how are you going to best impart that information? And the more the donor understands where you are, the more they can make a decision on, does it make sense for me to stay with them or join with them for the first time? It's very hard to make a decision if you're underinformed. It's nearly impossible. So I think right now communication should be, and I want to say, I can't say enough right now that it needs to be personal and intimate and warm. I can't say that enough. I've been saying it for a really long time and people have always gone, no. And I was like, okay, donors who I've been their philanthropic advisor to for years say, I go to these nonprofits for my hope. It's where I find faith. It's what makes me feel. And when it's stiff and formal and there's not a story of a person affected or stories of what makes this organization unique and special, it feels like another transaction in my life rather than another relationship that I really value. Please be warm and personal. Please bring your personality. I spoke to a donor at the organization I'm with the other day, and I said, okay, you first, how are you holding up? And she shared, and then she's like, your turn. And then I said, so what do you think? What do you think about this organization that I'm now very proud to represent? Do you want to stay with us? Do you have questions? Like, what can we talk about that's going to be most helpful to you? And can I hear what's on your mind when you're thinking about your thoughts about the world, your hopes and your concerns? And y'all, we just talk to each other. We just talk to each other. And at the end of it, she's like, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. This is where I live. And you guys have got me. And I said to her, okay, so what's the best way I can keep you updated so that you really feel you know what I know, as maybe not as soon as I know it, but pretty soon after. And then she just mapped it. This is the time to be in real, personal, deep, meaningful conversation with donors. Don't guess what they want. Don't wonder. Don't send out an appeal and cross your fingers. Pick up the phone and start talking to them. You are going to lose some people likely in this. You just are. People are, whether or not people lose assets, their perception is that they might. And sometimes, and it's not greed, it's fear that has people retreat. But one of the things that I've really seen, that where I see people's profound humanity rise above fear, is when you keep creating opportunities that feel like they make a home with you. People start to come to you, that you draw them in, because if they keep seeing these wonderful things you're doing and what you're hopeful about and what you're concerned about and what you're real about, people want to live in those places. So I'm going to pause there just in case, because I'm seeing there's some stuff in Q&A, and if you want to ask me anything, Jack, that's
Yeah, I'm gonna pull in, but I wanna pull on a thread that you said, Kath, and I think that nonprofits do deliver hope and possibility, and I think even more so, and I think when Cathy and I are doing a lot of things together in kind of role reversal kind of ways too, which is, coming at it from more of a, even though I've been a fundraiser, a donor perspective, and then a fundraising perspective, and I think so much. And I think that's the richness of, and hopefully the honesty and where we need to get to is for, to your point, to try to develop those deep relationships. And I think to your point, and it's one of my sort of pet peeves, but also understanding the reality that a lot of philanthropic relationships are just super transactional. And I don't mean that in the ticket purchase sense, though that's true. And I'm also a trustee of the Sundance Institute where it's really true. And I've been making a lot of calls to people who, give gifts to primarily get tickets or access or whatever. So it becomes quickly apparent for which relationships are transactional and where people understand deep mission. But, brass tacks around that, Kath, in a time when, again, there's limited time. If you can have a conversation with everyone, and what I'm hearing you say in part, which I think is absolutely right, is, pick up the phone and call. But what are some strategies that you think that can push the urgency? Because I think, and this is true for all my organizations that I'm involved with, you just don't know if money's going to come in because of the nature of how much is changing. So how do you communicate effectively around the need for donors to get to a yes maybe quickly, even announce intention because we're planning whether layoffs are going to happen or things like that? Like, how do you, in a time when you need to do the deep listening, also communicate a sense of urgency and move towards a transformational, away from transactional relationship, and yet, get in the reality of that a little bit, and how that works for you if you had that development hat on, which I know you do.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So this is where being a fundraiser and being a fundraising leader distinguishes themselves. Years and years ago, I was doing a training, and in the middle of it, there's a board member said to me, "I can't believe what you do for a living is ask people for money." And I looked at her, I said, "I can't believe you think what I do for a living is ask people for money. It comes up one time every 10 to 12 months. And yet it's the thing that we fixate on is when am I going to ask? How much should I ask for? Did I over ask? Did I under ask? Like, we're neurotic about that. And it actually keeps us from building the relationships around values and vision and hope because we are hyper obsessing about a dollar amount. So the reason I say to pick up the phone, and somebody has a question from Catherine about deep listening, and your team consists of 2 staff, so ability to talk to donors is limited. Totally hear you on this, sister. So each of you should choose 5 donors and write to them and say, "Can I pick up the phone and talk to you? This is not an ask call. I really want to connect, hear how you're doing, talk to you about what we're doing over here," because it's hard, Jack, to come up with what's this plan A, plan B, plan C for my organization if we hit a Great Depression, if we, et cetera. If you do not know what is on the minds of the people who fund you, you will forever walk around a little like slamming into walls. It's like all of my friends who are working for profits. They're writing to customers and calling customers and asking customers things. They're not just saying, well, let's make 10,000 t-shirts and hope they get bought. So this is the time where trying to do development or fundraising in a vacuum is just going to turn around and backfire. You will hear from people some things that will be hard to hear, but it is better to hear it and know it up front, because you might actually get the kind of donor feedback that helps you figure out how and in what ways you can pivot your model so that there is long-term sustainability for you and the organization. The total pain about what we're going through now, and there are so many pain points, but one of the big ones is, the question is, will we survive? And I actually think it's, will we survive as we currently exist as an organization? Or does our organization need to adapt to the world we're now living in to survive and thrive in that way? Mm-hmm. So when you think of, arts organizations that, somebody reached out to me who's a big patron of a ballet and said, You know, if we cancel 2 seasons and our guests don't come and sit in the seats in ballet, they're just never going to come back. And I said, oh my goodness, that's quite a projection in the future. But I said, okay, but if it's true that no one's going to go to the ballet for a year, we don't know if that's true, but let's say it's true. Does the ballet still have something meaningful to offer to someone if they're not in a seat with it in the stage in front of them? I'm saying I don't know as somebody who has never been to a ballet in my life. I'm asking you and your organization to say, what is it that you're saying this form of dance offers? And is it meaningful in a time, or is it time to just retire ballet because we have a global pandemic? Mm. And he said, of course not. It offers something for our souls when we feel like we need something to feed us. And I said, okay, so is the only way those of us can get fed by your art form going to a place and sitting down, or is there something else? So there's not a place that isn't having to step back and look closely and say, what we do, what we offer, is it relevant? Does it matter? Does it make a difference? Does it add richness to our community? Does it keep us vibrant? Does it keep us healthy? This is a chance to ask all those questions of yourself as an organization, and then go to donors and say, we've been asking ourselves these questions. Can I ask you what you think of these questions? Do you think we have a role in the future of this state? We think we do, but what do you think? I promise you, if you can have these kind of generative, deep conversations, some of the fear, not all of it, but some of the fear will start to lift a little. And you'll start to see who's really now wants to go the distance with us. I think, and last thought on this, is that a donor said to me recently, I don't want to ask people to do more work when they already have so much work to do, but I do wonder if there's actually an opportunity to now have conversations that we haven't been having before. And I think the answer to that is yes. And let me just say, oh my God, I almost just swore and I held it back. Such a Massachusetts kid, you guys, and I can't, it just flies out of me. It's a lot of work. I'm not at all going, just schedule some calls, talk to some people. No, I'm asking you to do a lot of work, because what I'm asking you to do is leadership work, not just making the budget, but seeing how do we fulfill a mission here.
Well, and Kath, that brings up something for me as someone who's been obsessed with leadership development. And, you know, this idea of, to your point, this is hard stuff. I'm not sure I could handle being executive director, head of development right now, to be clear, you know, and you are dealing with so much uncertainty. Some leaders are great in uncertainty, some aren't, you know, and it gets into, you know, how do we all take ownership of, and by all, I mean donors, board members. I'm curious about, because for me right now, I think it's a time for board members and other non-paid staff that are affiliated with organizations, volunteers, to really lean in a way that we have not had to lean in before. And we're not used to that either. And that could be a time suck, or it can be incredibly useful. I think it really depends. It depends, you know, if you're not an organization that's ever really leveraged your board members to you're starting from zero versus, you know, organizations who really have. But how do you think of, you know, how to create the best environment for success in this time? And I think to your point of reimagining, you know, I'm on the board of the Sundance Institute right now, right? And, you know, obviously like every other film festival, we don't know what the situations are going to be like a year from now. We're very lucky that we got our festival in. But I see our executive director with her team, maybe Betsy Wallace is on this call, you know, and there's so many arts organizations, obviously, that are likely on this call as well that have had to cancel. But how do you can't be in it on your own, or you're not going to survive. So how do you think about how boards and teams go through that process of reimagining what they could look like in the future? And at the same time, of course, is bringing money in. But I want to focus in on the sort of the role of the board members a little bit, and sort of the bigger champions, and the maybe, you know, thoughts on peer-to-peer fundraising and what's worked. What have you seen really work well in that environment?
Yeah, you got it, Jeff. Yeah. So You know, historically, so I've been doing development a long time, y'all, long time. And there was a time where I was like, what if we just have no board of directors ever? Because board of directors made me want to slam my head up against a wall. I would be like, we do so much work to prep for board meetings. And then there's just a lot of rubber stamping and there's not engagement, until I realized, oh my God, I'm not helping lead this board. I just expect this group of people that don't know each other that well to figure out their best right role in mission fulfillment, when many of these folks haven't done it before, or they've done it before in different organizations. And I just saw my own leadership fail in that. And so I went to the members of this board and said, you know, how do I engage you in a way that this feels like a meaningful experience to you? I don't want to just say, will you call these 3 donors and thank them? Or can I have 5 names of people? And just not bad engagement. So this is the time to do the same thing you do with your donors with board members. But I think with board members, it is okay to say, this is really a stepping up time for all of us as leaders. And here's how I'm seeing stepping up in my role as in development or in ED or on this board. And I wanted to talk to you about, what do you think for you? When you look at our organization and you look at the landscape we're operating in, what do you think you could bring forward maybe now for the first time in a whole new way that could keep us as strong as possible? You know, I said this to someone recently, and she said, you know, am I allowed to do that with the board? And I was like, oh, hell yeah, you go right ahead. These are people who love the mission. And no one wants to feel like they're not using their time in the best way possible right now. I don't know anyone who just feels like, yeah, whatever, I'm on this board. People are not having that experience. So I think it's time to kind of go to those top people and say, and ask, how could you and want to be engaged, and what can I do to help you do that to the best of your ability? And then be really honest that it's not always fun, but please don't bail when it gets hard. Mm-hmm. You know, I had someone once said to me, I really want to do this work because I want to feel better. And I was like, oh, sister, if you want to feel better, I don't know, you got to go to yoga or climb a mountain, because you ain't getting it in social change, my girl. Because sometimes it's so hard. And board members or staff or people can fight, but you stay with it, even when it gets hard, and you have the hard conversations. And so I think I just keep coming back to how much leadership is needed right now, from every person in every way to the best of their ability. And solo leadership will be a massive fail if a nonprofit doesn't do this in kind of a deep community way, where we all see each other as leaders and solutions, versus putting it all on one ED, one donor, the board chair, and then everyone else does this and says, well, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. You may be right, but you won't be successful. And so start to look at everyone in the ecosystem of your organization as your peer and one of your other champions. This is what my hope is for this pandemic, is that we actually start to work with each other, maybe in a little less kind of power trip way that we've certainly seen some things play out in our sector.
Yeah, and I want to put an exclamation mark around this board conversation. You know, someone who serves on, you know, a couple of boards and have served on many, and I've been a board chair and board members. I think if anyone is a board chair, even if you're a board member right now, and you're not really getting communicated with, you don't know what's going on, you're not being asked to lean in or do more, you're not being asked, you know, about your current year giving, then you should be the one that's asking. Because I think if you're on a board, to Cathy's point, I think a lot of us, and I've done this in the past too, serve on a board maybe more for ego, because it's, you know, it's like cool or something, or building your resume. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people do. And you know, now is the time, to your point, you know, that it's actual work. Boards are work. You have a fiduciary responsibility, you have a personal responsibility. And I think it's been easy to let things slide, or just to be accepting, you know, of different levels of participation. And I think you can do it in a nice and kind way. And I think a lot of things need to reset in this pandemic. And I think especially boards and their commitment in tightening up governance and asking people to really step up and step in at this time, I think is a big one. I just want to encourage folks, I'm going to ask a question from Laura in the Q&A, but please, we want this to make this relevant to you. So if there's a question we're not hitting yet or something, that if it's a comment, put it in chat. If it's a question, put it in the Q&A section, because we have about 20 minutes and just want to make sure you get the most of Cathy in this time. So please ask questions.
Yeah, and if you crazy disagree with me and are like, what is she even talking about? Just really, whatever's on your mind, this is your chance to share it all and ask it all.
And with each other too, to share with each other. So the question from Laura is, how do I approach a new prospect during this weird time? Someone who has never engaged with the college before.
Yeah. Oh, Laura, my God, it's such a great question. And I have to tell you, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And just to give you a practice that I do, when I am first asked a question, I flip it and imagine I get an email from an organization I've never heard from before, who's asking me if I might be interested, and what's my first response to it. I actually think it's completely okay to approach a prospect right now. I would have said no 8 weeks ago. I would have gone, nope, not the wise idea. But I got 2 approaches recently. And one was it felt like an opportunity for me to be deeper in the community in Western Mass where I live than maybe I have been before. It was so well structured about the chance to stand up for and be in solidarity with undocumented immigrants in our community. And there was nothing about it that was, these folks aren't getting a stimulus. It was, these folks are doing such incredible leadership right now, extraordinary, and let me map it for you. And having your voice as part of this will make even more of a difference. And that felt like such okay, wow, like we're not looking at communities as not strong and powerful. We're really seeing how powerful constituencies are during this time. And I ended up being a yes and sending money. And then I got one from another group that maybe I gave to like a decade ago. And I think they did that thing, that thing where, someone's done this, where they just did a database call. They're like, she gave a gift 10 years ago, send her an email and say, it's been a little bit since we talked to you. And I was like, oh no, pumpkins, no. But the reason it didn't work is not because I don't value the work and the mission, but because it felt really false. It just didn't have any sense of, this is an invitation for you to be part of Massachusetts moving forward in the strongest way possible. So, Laura, I would say for you to really think through, if it's engage with the college, if you're at a college, what is it that your college is doing that would be really attractive and interesting and compelling to people right now? Because I think people will go in the direction of things that feel compelling. And my advice to you again, because you are all also donors, everybody on this call is a donor. It's really, I can't say this enough, the number of the zeros on a check is less relevant than the commitment and the intention behind it. Look at what's coming in your email box and detach from it a little bit. And this is where your leadership comes in. Look at it and say, is that a compelling email that I just got? If it is, why? What about it makes it compelling that I could borrow some of that approach? Or do you look at one and go, oh, that didn't quite maybe go how they wanted it? You're not criticizing them, but you're just taking kind of almost an anthropological approach where you look at it and say, why do I think that didn't work? Jackie and I at the beginning of this thing really looked at which for-profit companies were really getting messaging right and which ones were like, we were like, oh no, did they really do that? Did they? And you just kind of go, oh, you cringe a little. Think this is a time to sit back and say, what is it about this mission that I love, that I think is vital and important and relevant and timely, and that should last through this pandemic and can come out stronger the other side? And then share that with the prospect. Why I am at this college, why I love it is this, this, and this. This may not be the right time at all for you to engage, but if you'd be open to a conversation, I would love to share more about that and hear what's on your mind. But I think bringing your passion forward right now is going to be really important in terms of getting people's attention. Just as a side note, when Jackie and I were sharing all these emails from for-profit companies, there was a really funny one from Levi Strauss that said, we're closing all our stores for the health and wellness of our employees and customers, but know that our online store is open. Not that you care at all right now about buying a pair of jeans. You don't, but if you ever decide you do, the online store is for you. But it was just it landed exactly right, because we were all still like deer in the headlights going, what? If they had said 2-for-1 jeans, you would have just been upset with them. So again, please bring you forward in this. I can't say that enough. Your passion and your commitment matter a tremendous amount. This is not the time to shelve that. This is the time to bring that forward.
Yeah, and Laura further asked Cathy about appropriate sort of phone calls versus emails. And I will say, because I'm reflecting on sort of what my responses have been to asks during this time, as well as current gifts. And, I think part of this is how do we encourage and support, and I know there are some sort of donors on this call that are board members, et cetera. And as you said, everyone's a donor, but to think about, looking through your list of organizations you usually give to, write the check now if you can. If you can't, even let them know, if your situation has changed is a big one. But just communication on both sides. And I think I just want to respond, Laura, personally. I think with organizations I've given to in the past that I have a relationship, I kind of want that phone call. Not because I'm making work, but because it moves it up to a priority for me. If Katie Wright's going to call me to say, Jackie, can you do something now? I'm going to pick her up because it's an organization I've given to. I think phone calls when you don't have a relationship could be tricky. But I think if you do have a relationship, and this is someone that's been a regular donor to you, I personally say absolutely call and leave a message. And I think thank you calls too. I had the privilege of making a whole round of thank you calls for the Christian Center. And it was just such a pleasure. A lot of, voicemails saying, this is Jackie saying thank you for giving to the Christian Center. I had one person who I shared this with Cathy, and I didn't even get a word out. I was going to say thank you, and the person, I won't remain nameless on the other line, said, why don't you go get a real job? And then hung up on me. And I was like, well, I'm a volunteer, and those people have real jobs, and that's really mean. And it sat with me for 3 days. I couldn't get rid of it. But generally speaking, people do appreciate the thank yous. They appreciate being asked if you want to know more. And I think a phone call, especially in these times, if you have a relationship, is really worth it. But Cathy, would love your opinion on that as well. And again, if you have more questions, we have about 5 more minutes and then we'll start to do a wrap up. But please feel free to post questions in the Q&A or in the chat. We can watch that too. But Cathy, what do you think about phone calls versus emails?
Yeah, I really agree. Phone calls with people you have a lasting relationship with. I think it's a lifeline for people who've been indoors for a long time or just starting to go outdoors. I do find it normalizes to connect with organizations you've been in touch with for a while. It's like, they're still there, you're still there. I think with prospects, ask permission for email and ask permission for a phone call. And overall, my advice over the years always been is when people say, how do you know when to ask for a gift, is ask permission to ask. So I've spent my career saying, would it work the next time we spoke if we talked about a philanthropic contribution? Is that the right timing for you? It is a way to queue up that will be the nature of the next touch point, and allows the person to say, sure, absolutely. And then when you bring it up, it doesn't feel awkward. You've already agreed on it. If they say, boy, now's not the right time, but maybe we can talk in the summer, you flag that when you reach out. They were the one who gave you the time frame for talking. So you're really actually at that point doing good follow-up. Call your donors. Call them. Even if you call 3 a week, call your donors. One of this quote I read years and years ago is, how you spend your days is, of course, how you spend your life. And I translated that from my work life is, you know, how I spend my days is directly related to the outputs that I create. And if I'm not in communication with the very people fueling my organization to keep going, I'm ultimately not going to get the outputs I want to create. So a lot more time writing to donors, thinking about what donors need, calling them, and creating communications that you want to open and read. Really. You know how you get stuff and you're like, add to trash, add to trash, add to trash. Say to yourself, my goal is no one adds to trash. This is so well written. They're going to just frame it. Like, really take time to write to people in a thoughtful way and listen on these phone calls. You're going to want to talk. No talking. Ask a question and then really, really listen. And then when they say, tell me how your org is, then it's your turn. Yeah, so that is my thought about that.
And Kath, I want to share something. I don't know if everyone sees the Q&A, but Jill Piasatelli, I hope I pronounced that right, made a great comment. Wondering if when things feel really uncertain for donors, is there wisdom in moving into smaller ask amounts, but more frequently, monthly, semi-annually, moving from one time to sustaining? And I'll just add, Kath, I love you. I think that's a great idea. Because people's economic situation, I think, is really shifting right now. And if someone is usually, you know, $1,000 donor and could do, you know, a quarter of that now and pace it out, I have not seen that come across my inbox or even someone make that request of me or even generically in random emails. And I think that's a really, really good idea, Jill, because people's situation is really changing right now, and do what you can now. But
Yeah.
Kath, I love your response for that. And again, just an ask for any final questions before we wrap up in the next few minutes. Please feel free to post.
Yep. Jill, amazing fundraising leadership. Yes, thumbs up. I want to add to that, and I want you to all know that these are my projections based on having done this a long time, but I am acutely aware that the world seems to change every 24 hours. But I think now in the summer is a very smart time to shore up resources for your organization. You know, I spend a lot of time reading everything so that I can understand what is the psychology, what is the impact on donors' psychology based on what is out there in the sector. I do not predict that we will have an end of year fundraising in the same way you've seen it in the past 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so I really invite you to say to people, you know, if it works for you, if the time's right, if you want to pay it out differently, if you can pay it out in advance. But historically, after Memorial Day in the US, we don't fundraise. I'm going to tell you now, fundraise like crazy. People, while some things are opening up a little, I don't hear and sense that people are going to go on big vacations for like 2 months and not be around and just wait for Labor Day to come to reconnect. The landscape has shifted. So please shore up some resources now for your organization, because I think that end of year is not going to look how it's looked. I think there are some more questions and I do want to get to them.
I think I've been tracking pretty well, Kath. Yeah. There was one, and then I have a last, I just want to ask it because from Juliana's asking about local businesses for sponsorship gifts. I assume that means in kind, maybe not. But around virtual events. And we didn't really talk about virtual events that much. You know, Kathy and I spoke about them. There's actually a really big one and probably a fun one tonight. If you want to Google it, it's Ms. Foundation. It's one of my favorite events in New York every year. Gloria Steinem founded it. It's an amazing feminist event that happens, and it's online tonight. So if you want to check out a virtual event and see how it goes, think about Googling that one. But, you know, gifts around virtual events, or, you know, that I think so much needs to be reimagined around that whole model. Kathy and I were going to get into talking about what we think's broken in philanthropy, and, you know, obviously relying so much on these events is probably one of the things. But any quick thoughts on the question that Juliana asked?
Yeah, I don't know about you all, but I have a sense that by end of the summer, we're all going to just want to pour lighter fluid over our laptops and go, sorry, can't make the Zoom call. Can't do it. I'm not sure how sustainable it is. There's really good articles. P.S. just for your well-being is to minimize the number of Zoom calls and go back to actual phone calls. That it's it's too much on our neuropathways to constantly, endlessly do video, sidebar. I think that what I would be doing if I had an organization whose event netted significant money for the budget is call donors and say, you have been such an extraordinary event donor. Obviously, that landscape has changed. We can do a huge online event, but you may be saying, please don't make me go to a huge online event. What do you think? There was an event for an organization I'm working with that we canceled, and we called every sponsor and said, would you like the sponsorship money back? And everyone said, oh my God, no, keep it for your mission. It was always meant for that. The event's just a nice chance to see everybody in person that we only see once a year. So this is, again, the time to do real sleuthing and say, so I know the Ms. Foundation event's tonight, right? And it'll be interesting to see, is that something that donors flock to? Is that something people really wanted to feel connected to a mission? And right now I have to say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if people are going to online event out or if it's going to become our lifeline. The truth is, I have no idea. So the best thing that you can do is call your donors and say, we want to build an engagement with you, but not have you come to things that you would really rather say, I'm sorry, I lost all electricity for 10 minutes. I couldn't make it. This is, again, the chance to have the transparent conversations we've all wanted to have. We finally are living in a time where you can have them and not feel like you have to tiptoe around them.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to pass this back over to Alex. We're almost out of time. I just want to thank everyone for joining. I mean, know that we all know that we're kind of smiling and joking a little bit, but also just, I want to have a t-shirt, put the fun back in fundraising, but maybe not now. This is not the time for, maybe too much fun, but just know that we know how difficult it is in the environment right now. We didn't quote a lot of stats, but they're out there just in terms of, how much giving is impacted. It's always a constant percentage of GDP. So with contracting economic activity, that's just the reality. What we didn't get to is talking a lot about what an amazing community we live in, and we're part of this philanthropic ecosystem. And, maybe that's a question, for you, Alex, to carry forward as, how do organizations together with their supporters really, think about strengthening the ecosystem in a time when a lot is broken? I would have that question and would be very interested in participating in that. But I want to thank Cathy. I've written a lot with Cathy. If you want to check out my LinkedIn, there are 3 articles that we've written together over the course of the years. You can Google Cathy, look on her LinkedIn for more. Just thank you for joining today, and thank you for your great questions and for the work that you do in our communities. Thank you, Cathy.
Yeah, oh my goodness, thank you guys. Seriously, Utah. I learned all these cool things about Utah recently, like first state to allow women to vote. What's up, Utah? Again, we're so snobby on the East Coast. It's so irritating. And you guys just crush things out your way all the time. But just quickly, Richard, your question on countering funding going to political campaigns. Yeah, holy cats, Richard, right? Because this is a big one. This is a really big one. And I am actually seeing, interestingly, why I imagine people will funnel a lot of money into candidate currently. I do also think that people are going to put money behind local offices and people running locally. I think we've seen how local leadership needs to kick into action and statewide leadership kicks into action for the health and well-being of their own communities. I think you're going to see a lot more activity around local leadership in electoral politics. So that's one. Again, I go back to I will say to people, I'm not sure if you're going to be putting money into electoral politics. 2 donors recently say to me, yeah, no, that's broken. So I'm going to put it into community organizations that actually make things happen no matter what. So what I realized is I was drawing a whole bunch of assumptions there. So I cannot say enough. Please just pick up the phone and start talking to people. They will help feed and inform moving forward. And then if you're in a similar role to me, you get to bring that to a board of directors and say, how does this inform our strategy, this input and feedback from our key supporters? And my last thing is just, you know, please be proud of yourself. This is so bloody hard right now, and we are all kind of swimming in unbelievable uncertainty. And your work and your leadership is vital, vital, vital to overall your state and for people feeling connected and kind of bonded together. So please be proud of the work you're doing. On behalf of the state of Massachusetts, thank you for what you're doing in Utah and keeping Utah so strong. And I promise we're working equally hard in Massachusetts.
Thanks, Kath. Sorry, Alex, we didn't give you enough time. But
No. I was just going to wrap it up and thank you guys. This has been a great discussion. And Jackie, I'll look forward to keeping in touch of other discussions that may be relevant for this group. And Kate, thank you so much for co-hosting this with us. So great discussion. Thank all, and be safe. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, guys.
Bye, everybody. Bye.